Good morning, students. Today we will learn about the diencephalon. So, what is diencephalon? Diencephalon lies between the cerebrum and the brainstem. It is a relay or the central part which lies in between the cerebrum and the brainstem. So, it extends from the lower part of the cerebrum and into the brainstem. It also surrounds the third ventricle and it includes various regions like the thalamus, hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. So, we are going to study each and every one in detail. So, what is thalamus? Thalamus is called as the inner chamber and it measures about 3 centimeter in length and makes up to 80% of the diencephalon. So, 80% of the diencephalon is made up of thalamus. It consists of paired oval masses of gray matter. So, what does it contain? It contains gray matter that are in pairs organized into nuclei with interspersed tracts of white matter. So, you can recall that the spinal cord contains gray matter in the inside and white matter in the outside. But here, the gray matter is present outside and white matter is present inside. So, it consists of gray matter which are paired oval masses. They are organized into nuclei and in the inside it contains white matter. So there is a bridge of gray matter called as the intermediate mass, that is called as the interthalamic adhesion, which joins the right and left half of the thalamus in about 70% of human brains. So the right and left half of the thalamus are joined together by a central or the intermediate mass called as the interthalamic adhesion. There is also a white-shaped sheet of white matter on both sides of the thalamus. It is called as the internal medullary lamina. This divides the gray matter into the right and left sides of the thalamus. So this is you can see in the picture. It consists of this white matter consists of axons. So these axons are myelinated axons that enter and leave the various thalamic nuclei. So axons they go through the different nuclei and connect the thalamus and the cerebral cortex through the internal capsule. So internal capsule, which is a thick band of white matter lateral to the thalamus. So here you can see the picture of the thalamus. This is the lateral view of the right hemisphere. This is the medial view of the left cerebral hemisphere. You can see the central sulcus and this is the thalamus. You can see the thalamus here. This is the intermediate mass. So here you can see the right and left side of the thalamus and you can see the intermediate mass. So this is the structure which is connecting the right and left side of the thalamus. This is called as the Y-shaped white matter which is running through the thalamus. It is called as the internal medullary lamina. So internal medullary lamina you can see here and as well as here. Y-shaped white matter. Apart from this, you have many regions. You can see there is a reticular network here. Reticular network is seen here also, and it is divided into many regions called as the. This is the medial. The yellow colored ones are the medial regions, and here you can see the internal medullary lamina, the Y-shaped white matter. Here you can see internal medullary lamina, and inside the white matter you can see many nucleus or simply you call it as nuclei. So here you can see nuclei. These are called as the intralaminar nuclei. So these are called as the intralaminar nuclei. And these regions are called as the lateral posterior. This is the ventral posterior. So these regions are lateral posterior. This is the ventral posterior. This is the pulvinar. And this is the reticular. So here also you can see the reticular. This is the medial. So you can see the medial one which are present internally. These are present out externally and medial is present internally. The medial is shown here and this is the anterior. So this is the anterior. This is the lateral posterior. So this is the transverse section of the right side of the thalamus and this is superolateral view of the thalamus. So here you can see the ventral anterior. So this side you can see the ventral posterior. Here you can see the ventral anterior. This is the lateral dorsal. Lateral dorsal. This is the lateral ventral. This is the ventral posterior. Same as this one, ventral posterior. And these are some other nuclei called as the lateral geniculate, medial geniculate, pulvinar. You can see the pulvinar here. Lateral posterior, same last lateral posterior is seen here. This is the Y-shaped internal medullary lamina, and this is the midline which contains the mass called as the intermediate mass which connects the right and the left thalamus. So, what are the functions of the thalamus? So, thalamus plays a very important role in the relay of the sensory information. So, the thalamus is the major relay station for most of the sensory impulses, that is between the cerebral cortex and the spinal cord and the brainstem. So, they pass the information that reach the primary sensory areas of the cerebral cortex from the lower part. Sensory neurons, it is ascending. So, it passes information from the spinal cord and the brainstem into the cerebrum. This thalamus also contributes to motor functions by transmitting information. Motor functions also, not only the sensory function, motor function also by transmitting the information from the cerebellum and basal ganglia to the primary motor areas of the cerebral cortex. So, from the cerebellum and ganglia, it conveys information into the cerebral cortex. It also relays nerve impulses between the different areas of the cerebrum. So, in between the different areas of the cerebrum, also the nervous impulses are relayed by the thalamus, and it plays a very important role in maintenance of the consciousness. Okay, now we have seen a lot of nucleus. So, based upon the position and functions, there are 7 major group of nuclei on each side of the thalamus. So, it is a pair. On each side, there are 7 major groups of nuclei. What is the first one? First one is the anterior nucleus. So, this receives input from the hypothalamus and sends output to the limbic system. So, the important function of the anterior nucleus is emotions and memory. So, this is the function of the anterior nucleus. The next one is the medial nuclei. This receives input from the limbic system and basal ganglia and sends the output to the cerebral cortex. So, their function include emotion, learning, memory, and cognition. That is knowledge, thinking, and knowledge. The third one is the nuclei in the lateral group. So you have the lateral dorsal nucleus and lateral posterior nucleus and alveolar nucleus. So what do they do? These lateral group of nuclei receive input from the limbic system, superior colliculi and cerebral cortex and send the output to the cerebral cortex. So from the three different nuclei, the lateral nuclei are lateral dorsal nuclei, which functions in the expression of emotions. The lateral posterior nucleus and the alveolar nucleus help in the integration of sensory information. The fourth one, you have ventral nucleus. Okay, there are 5 pairs of ventral nuclear group. So what are they? They are the ventral anterior nucleus, ventral lateral nucleus, ventral posterior nucleus, the lateral geniculate nucleus and the medial geniculate nucleus. So what are the functions of each one? The ventral anterior nucleus receives input from the basal ganglia and sends the output to motor areas of the cerebral cortex. So it plays a very important role in the movement control. So this acts as a relay in between the cerebral cortex and the other regions of the brain. The ventral lateral nucleus receives input from the cerebellum and basal ganglia and sends output to motor areas of the cerebral cortex. So this also plays a role in the control of the movement. The third one is the ventral posterior nucleus. This relays impulses from the somatic sensations such as touch, pressure, vibration, itching, tickling, temperature, pain, and proprioception from the face and body to the cerebral cortex. The fourth one is the lateral geniculate nucleus. So it is like a bent like a knee. This relays visual impulses for sight from the retina to the primary visual area of the cerebral cortex. So it is concerned with vision. The fifth one is the medial geniculate nucleus. This relays auditory impulses for hearing. So from the ear to the primary auditory area of the cerebral cortex. So these are the 5 ventral nucleus. Fifth one is the intralaminar nuclei. This lie within the internal medullary lamina and it makes connection with the reticular formation, cerebellum, basal ganglia, and wide areas of the cerebral cortex. So the fifth one is the intralaminar nuclei, and the function is in the arousal, sexual arousal, something activation of the cerebral cortex from the brainstem reticular formation, and integration of sensory and motor information. The sixth one is the midline nucleus. It forms a thin band adjacent to the third ventricle, and the function is mainly memory and olfactory. So these are the main functions. The seventh one is the reticular mass, which surrounds the lateral aspect of the thalamus, which is present next to the internal capsule. So they are involved with the monitors, filters, and integrates activities of other thalamic nuclei. Integration between the different parts of the thalamus. So these are the different types of nucleus. The next region of the diencephalon is hypothalamus. So the first one is the thalamus, the second one is the hypothalamus, the third one is the epithalamus. So I think you would have heard this name very often. It is very important endocrine function. It has a very important endocrine function. What is the hypothalamus? The hypothalamus is a small part of the diencephalon which is present or located below the thalamus. That means inferior to the thalamus. What does it contain? This also contains many nuclei, dozen or so nuclei in four major regions. So the four major regions are divided into mammillary region, tuberal region. Here you can see the picture, mammillary region, tuberal region, supraoptic region, and the preoptic region. So it is given in different colors. You can see the mammillary region, it is shown in red color. So it contains two different nucleus called as the posterior hypothalamic nucleus and the mammillary body. These two represent the mammillary region. The blue colored one is called as the tuberal region. You can see the dorsomedial nucleus, ventromedial nucleus, and the arcuate nucleus. So these three composite the tuberal region. The third one is the green colored one called as the supraoptic region. So it is made up of nucleus like paraventricular nucleus, anterior hypothalamic nucleus, supraoptic nucleus, suprachiasmatic nucleus. So these are the four different nuclei present in the supraoptic region. The fourth one is the preoptic region. It is shown in violet color. So here you can see lateral preoptic nucleus, medial preoptic nucleus. So these are the two preoptic nucleus. And you can see the infundibulum, and this is the optic chiasm. So this shows the major areas of the nucleus, hypothalamic nucleus. So let us see one by one. What is mammillary region? Mammillary region, as the name says, that it is nipple shaped. It is present adjacent to the midbrain, and it is the most posterior part of the hypothalamus. So as we have seen, it includes the mammillary bodies and posterior hypothalamic nucleus. Mammillary bodies and the posterior hypothalamic nucleus. The mammillary bodies are two small rounded projections that serve as relay stations for reflexes related to the sense of smell. So they are related to the sense of smell. The next widest part of the hypothalamus is called as the tuberal region. So it includes the dorsomedial nuclei, ventromedial nuclei, arcuate nuclei. So these are the things: dorsomedial nuclei, ventromedial nuclei, and the arcuate nucleus. Plus the stalk-like infundibulum. So this stalk-like infundibulum, this is also involved under the tuberal region. So this infundibulum connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. So that is very important. The hormones produced by the hypothalamus gives information, whether inhibitory or the stimulatory information, to the pituitary. So infundibulum is the stalk-like region which connects the hypothalamus with the pituitary, and there is a region, slightly raised region, that completely encircles the infundibulum, called as the median eminence, through which the hormones flow into the uh, pituitary. Pituitary has two regions: anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. The third one is the supraoptic region. Supraoptic means above the eyes. Above the eyes. It lies superior to the optic chiasm. Here you can see the optic chiasm. Above the optic chiasm, you have the supraoptic region above the eyes. So it contains, as you can see, all the green colored ones: paraventricular nucleus, anterior hypothalamic nucleus, supraoptic nucleus, and suprachiasmatic nucleus. So these are the four regions. So axons from the paraventricular nucleus and the supraoptic nuclei from the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract extend through the infundibulum to the pituitary, to the posterior lobe of the pituitary. So, as I have told you, pituitary has two lobes, anterior lobe and the pituitary lobe. So, the axons which are coming from the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei will reach the pituitary through the infundibulum. The fourth one is the preoptic region. From the name you can understand it is anterior to the supraoptic region. So this is the violet colored ones, anterior to the supraoptic region. It usually considered part of the hypothalamus because it participates with the hypothalamus in certain autonomic activities. So what is the function of this? That is, this contain two nuclei, that is the lateral preoptic nuclei and the medial preoptic nuclei. Let us see the function of the hypothalamus. So, hypothalamus controls many body activities, internal body activities, and is a very important regulator of homeostasis by controlling various physiological functions. So, sensory impulses related to both somatic and visceral senses arrive at the hypothalamus. So, they receive many sensory inputs from different regions of the body through the ascending tract, as do impulses from receptors for vision, taste, and smell. So, not only the different parts of the somatic and visceral regions, it also receives sensory input from the vision, taste, and smell. Other receptors which are present within the hypothalamus will continually monitor the osmotic pressure, that is the any difference in the change in the ionic concentration, glucose level, certain hormone concentration for feedback mechanism, and the temperature of the blood. The hypothalamus has several very important connections with the pituitary. So it connects with the anterior and the posterior pituitary, and it will stimulate the pituitary to produce a variety of hormones. So some functions can be attributed to specific hypothalamic nuclei, but others are not precisely localized. So, what are the important functions of the hypothalamus? Control of the autonomic nervous system. That is a very, very important function. So, this hypothalamus controls and integrates activities of all the internal parts of the body, that is through the autonomic nervous system. This regulates the contraction of smooth muscles and cardiac muscles, and also the secretion of many glands. So, it is a very, very important function. So, the axons of the hypothalamus extend from the hypothalamus to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nuclei in the present in the brainstem and the spinal cord. So the axons are very long. So through the autonomic nervous system, the hypothalamus regulates major visceral activities, physiological activities, internal activities of the smooth muscles, like the regulation of heart rate, movement of the food through the gastrointestinal tract, contraction of the urinary bladder, etc. So that is the role of the hypothalamus in the control of autonomic nervous system. Next, what are the hormones produced by the hypothalamus? So hypothalamus produces many stimulating hormones called as the releasing hormones or inhibitory hormones. So it has two important connections with the pituitary. That is an endocrine gland located inferior to the hypothalamus. So one to the connection to the anterior pituitary, the other one is connected to the posterior pituitary. So the hormones released by the hypothalamus, as I told you, is called as the releasing hormone or inhibiting hormone. So they are released into the capillary network in the median eminence which surrounds the infundibulum. So the hormones are taken by the bloodstream directly to the anterior and the posterior lobe. So in the anterior lobe, they stimulate or inhibit secretions of the anterior pituitary hormones. I think you all know what are the anterior pituitary hormones: growth stimulating hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicular stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, etc. So the hypothalamus contains hormones like the releasing hormones: growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, thyroid, gonadotropin releasing hormone, etc. The next one, the axons also extend from the paraventricular and the supraoptic nuclei, which we have seen in the picture, through the infundibulum into the posterior lobe of the pituitary, where the cell bodies of these neurons will make two important hormones called as the oxytocin and the antidiuretic hormone. So oxytocin is involved in, I mean, the contraction of the muscles in the uterus, and antidiuretic hormone is important in the maintenance of the water volume in the body. So their axons transport these hormones to the pituitary, the posterior pituitary, where they are released. The next important function is the regulation of emotional and behavioral patterns. So, this hypothalamus, along with the limbic system, participates in that is the emotional and behavioral patterns like expression of anger, aggression, so pain and pleasure, and the behavioral pattern related to the sexual arousal. So this is very important. Next is the regulation of eating and drinking habits. So hypothalamus regulates food intake. That is, it contains a feeding center and a thirst center. So this region promotes eating, whether you want to feeling hungry, whether your stomach is full. The satiety center, which causes a sensation of fullness and that is, when your stomach is full, you stop eating. Podum. Okay, it also contains a thirst center. This will stimulate the cells in the hypothalamus, and it will sense the difference or change in the osmotic pressure due to the excessive volume or decreased volume of water in the blood when there is an increase or decrease in the ionic concentration. So that is sensed by the thirst center, and it causes the sensation of thirst when the water is lost in the urine or sweat. So we feel thirsty. This is because of the thirst center. So the intake of water restores the osmotic pressure to normal. Next is the control of body temperature. So the body temperature, the human beings are homeothermic animals. So the body temperature has to be maintained at 98.4 degrees Celsius. So this hypothalamus functions as a body thermostat. If there is increase in temperature, it will immediately bring down the temperature. If there is decrease in temperature, it will immediately shoot up the temperature. So that is the role of the hypothalamus. So if the temperature of the body flowing through the hypothalamus is above normal, the hypothalamus directs the autonomic nervous system to stimulate activities that promote less heat loss. So heat loss is promoted. When the body temperature is below normal, the hypothalamus generates impulses that promote heat production and retention. So thus the homeostasis of the body is maintained at the same temperature, unless and until we fall sick and have fever. The next function is the regulation of circadian rhythms, that is the wake sleep cycle, that is 24-hour cycle, and state of consciousness. So the nucleus involved with this particular function is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It serves as the body's internal biological clock, and the circadian rhythm is maintained, that is the pattern of biological activity, sleep wake cycle, that is in the 24-hour cycle, is maintained. So this is very much involved with the light and dark cycle. So when there is light in the day and dark in the night, so this nucleus receives input from the eye's retina and sends the output to the hypothalamic nuclei, reticular formation, and the pineal gland. So very important, pineal gland is a very small gland which is present next to the epithalamus. So the next region present in the diencephalon is the epithalamus. After thalamus, hypothalamus, it is the epithalamus. It is a small region. Epi means above. It is a small region superior and posterior to the thalamus. So what does it contain? This contains the pineal gland and the habenular nuclei. So what is the pineal gland? So it is a small gland at the size of the pea, and it protrudes from the posterior midline to the third ventricle. I think you would have seen in many pictures. Please go through that. The pineal gland is considered part of the endocrine system, like the pituitary and hypothalamus, because it secretes a very important hormone called as melatonin. So the melatonin is a very important hormone for the setting of the body's biological clock. It is a circadian rhythm controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. So the melatonin hormone is secreted more when in the night, during the darkness, when there is no light. So it promotes sleep. So nowadays the children or the teenagers are awake for a very long time during the night. So their melanin secretion gets affected, and the circadian rhythm, the sleep wake cycle also gets affected. So this will work along with the vision. That is the visual input from the eyes when there is light and when there is absence of light. So when you close the switch off the light, you automatically fall asleep. But when you keep the light burning, or when you keep the cell phone, mobile on, then the light will affect the secretion of the melatonin, which is responsible for the secretion of, that is the sleep. So the visual input from the eyes, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, everything will stimulate the pineal gland to secrete melatonin. So melatonin is secreted in a rhythmic pattern, which is secreted very high in the night when there is no light and very less in the daylight. There is another nuclei called as the habenular nuclei. This is involved in the smell, that is olfaction. That is the response to odors. The scent or chocolate chip cookies. So whatever you, from a distance itself, you can understand what mummy is cooking. Whether she is cooking chicken biryani or chicken or some spicy curries, or the smell of a cake. When you pass a cake shop, you can identify the smell of a cake and the scent. Especially females are very sensitive to the smell than male, especially during pregnancy. They're oversensitive to smell. They can easily identify the cologne or the scent, whatever it is. So this is associated with the olfactory. There are other organs called as the circumventricular organs. So these are the parts of diencephalon, okay, because they lie in the wall of the third ventricle. What do? They monitor chemical changes in the blood because they lack a blood-brain barrier. So whatever chemical or ions pass through the present in the blood passes through the circumventricular organ. They do not have blood-brain barrier. What do they include? The CVO, circumventricular organs, include the part of hypothalamus, pineal gland, pituitary gland, and few other structures nearby. So, what are the functions? These regions coordinate homeostatic activities of the endocrine and the nervous system. So they coordinate in between the endocrine system and the nervous system, such as they have to monitor the blood pressure. The blood pressure monitor is done by monitoring the change in the volume of the blood as well as the ionic concentration of the blood. So regulation of blood pressure. Not only that, the regulation of blood pressure depends upon the salt, and fluid balance depends upon the volume of fluid, hunger and thirst. So all these are monitored by the CVO. So they are also the sites of entry for the HIV in the brain. So when HIV enters the brain, it causes AIDS. So once it enters the brain, it causes dementia and other neurological disorders. So let us summarize the different functions of the diencephalon, the various regions of the diencephalon: thalamus, hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. So thalamus relay. It acts as a relay. It is what is a relay? A person playing a game, they relay a stick to different members in the group, who will take it from the starting point to the end point. So they relay sensory as well as the sensory input as well as the motor output to the cerebral cortex. From the sensory input means it is ascending. It is always ascending from the regions below the thalamus, that is the spinal cord, brain stem, to the cerebral cortex. It also contributes to motor function also by transmitting information from the cerebellum and the basal ganglia to the cerebral cortex. It plays a role in the maintenance of consciousness. Hypothalamus controls and integrates activities of the autonomic nervous system. It produces hormones, releasing and inhibiting hormones, and stimulates the anterior pituitary to release the pituitary hormones, and also stimulates the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin and ADH, antidiuretic hormone. It regulates the emotional and behavioral patterns, the anger, everything together with the limbic system. So it also contains the feeding center and the thirst center, which regulates the satiety, fullness of the stomach, and also drinking. It controls body temperature by serving as a body's thermostat. It also contains a suprachiasmatic nerve that regulates the circadian rhythms, sleep-wake cycle. Epithalamus consists of pineal gland, which secrete the melatonin, and habenular nuclei. So these are the different functions of the diencephalon. So let us study about the cerebrum in the next class. Thank you.